Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Every year on the 5th of June, the world comes together to observe World Environment Day, a global platform to raise awareness and inspire action for protecting our environment. This year, the spotlight is on a challenge that's as visible as it's invisible, that is plastic pollution. The United Nations has called for urgent solutions to tackle this crisis that's threatening ecosystems, human well-being and the climate. Plastic has slowly and silently crept into every part of our lives, from the depths of our oceans to the food that we eat and even the air that we breathe. And the message this year is clear. It's time to refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle and rethink how we engage with plastic in our daily lives. So how is India addressing this growing challenge? What are our global commitments and how far have we come? More importantly, how can each one of us, you and I, reflect on our own consumption patterns and contribute meaningfully to reducing plastic waste? To explore these questions and more, we are joined by two distinguished voices who bring deep insight and experience on this topic. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI. Dr. Dhawan, thank you very much for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. Also pleased to welcome Mr. C.K. Mishra, former Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Mr. Mishra, always a delight to have you with us on our program. Let's begin by understanding the wider problem. We will talk about India's policy responses, our global commitments in due course of the program. But to set the context of the program and to understand the scale and impact of this problem that we are discussing today, help us understand, Mr. Mishra, what makes the problem of plastic pollution a crisis which is one of the most urgent today and one of the most far-reaching environmental threats facing the world today, given the fact that plastic is everywhere, from the depth of the oceans to the air that we are breathing today?
Thank you. There is no doubt that plastics today is a major threat to the environment, to human life, and everything. But let us pause for a moment and think about plastics. It's not plastics that's the most dangerous thing. There's plastic in your everyday life. The specs I'm wearing is plastic. It is about how you treat plastics after use. It is about how you can lessen the consumption. Which brings us to the fact that the major issue is that whatever plastic goes into the environment, into our soil, into our water, are we able to retrieve it, recycle it? You use the word refuse. Not very easy in today's world. So what we need to focus on really as a country and globally is collection of plastic and recycling of plastic and other methods of disposal of plastic, whether it's biodegradable, whatever it is, compostable. So we need to actually take circularity very seriously and make sure that end-to-end plastic usage is met. Because per se, giving up plastic altogether is very difficult for the world. I mean, single-use plastic itself is proving so difficult. So if you talk in terms of the total plastic scenario, it may be difficult. Yes, I think time has come when we need to look at the production side. Can we do something about the reduction of production? Can we do something about the consumption at individual level? Because if you look at the statistics, particularly with reference to India, the total output or the plastic waste that we generate in India is growing every year, which clearly shows that the consumption of plastic is growing. So this is a serious question we need to look at. And I think the key issue lies in our MSW management, where we pick up plastics and recycle them.
Sure. What have been our initiatives is something that we will discuss in the second round perhaps. But Dr. Dhawan, I'll bring you in here. from where Mr. Mishra left at, and he pointed out a very vital problem. It's very difficult to refuse plastic, and in an age that we live in, and perhaps that's why, despite the growing awareness, despite the fact that the spotlight every year is on similar things on how to protect environment, we are still discussing, even in 2025, we are discussing that production of plastic and plastic waste worldwide is only increasing, even as we speak. So the question here is, how effective have concerted global efforts been to tackle this issue so far? And from here on, how do we move forward to ensure that change happens from just pledges to the real progress?
Yeah, the point which Mr. Mishra made, that plastic is something which is very difficult to refuse. And the reason behind it, first of all, it's affordable, it's flexibility, and therefore, whatever we are practically, whether it's the switches, whether it is your spectacles, whether it's your keyboard of the computer, everywhere we are using plastic. And similarly, like if you go back 40, 50 years back, or even 20, 30 years back, we used to get vegetables in old newspaper bags. But then that was something, half the time that will not, you won't be able to carry them back home. But we always carried a cloth bag with us so that we can put it in that. Now the ease is, because it's so cheap, even the sabji wala will tell you, should I double it because it's heavy? Because it's cheap. The other problem, the problem is not plastic. The problem is how we use it, how we misuse it. Because then that single-use plastic, it finds its way in the dustbin, and dustbin with all kinds of garbage, so that it even becomes difficult for a rag picker to separate plastic from rest of the garbage. And the other is that it's so cheap that the recycling is not attractive. But why can't we simply make, because if we cannot refuse, if we are going to continue use of plastic, what we need to do is, how do we collect it? And suppose, because if we put very high tariff on plastic and we say, you buy a bag which is bag for the lifetime, and once it's torn, you come and change with a new one. So if you're paying 100 rupees for a bag, I'm sure you are not going to throw it in the dustbin. And once it has lived its life, you'd go back and change it. And then that will stop single-use plastic. And you will ensure that whatever is being produced is getting recycled. It's coming back for further recycling. The other is also a sort of attitude, because we are moving more towards convenience, and therefore, even when you look at the use of plastic cutlery and the disposable plates and so on, that is again something which is not acceptable, because you can definitely have all these things the way we used to live earlier. They will get washed and they will get reused. But today it is, because of convenience, we have moved towards plastic utensils and so on. So what is happening at the global level? Yes, there are successful examples in some parts of the world, very successful ones, but then that doesn't come with just enforcing regulations. It is more that it's awareness and everyone becomes conscious. The other thing I would like to mention is that, yes, plastic is convenient, but we also have bioplastic now. That industry needs to get a push. Bioplastic is possible. You can produce it even from the de-oiled algal cake or other de-oiled oil cakes. And that plastic, because this is rich in organic content, actually helps the microbial growth in the soil. And with the result, the humus formation is far faster. It's faster in the air, in the soil. And therefore, one should also give a push, maybe sort of subsidy, because we have to put a cost to the cleaning the environment.
Sure, Dr. Dhawan.
And
We'll talk about the alternatives and how India is investing in that area in just a while. But let me also get in a reaction from Mr. Mishra. You spoke about how things have been very convenient for us, and that is why we choose plastic over, environment, and that's something that is causing the entire problem. But because over the last few years, there's been a lot of effort and there's been a lot of push from the government side to spread awareness and to push people towards adapting to sustainability. So hopefully with this growing awareness, we'll see some kind of change. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Mishra, is the ban on single-use plastic showing any positive results? And beyond that, what have been some key initiatives in terms of our policy response to curb plastic pollution?
Well, if I remember correctly, 2019, 5th of June, the Prime Minister announced ban on single-use plastics. Subsequently, a couple of years later, the ministry notified the items of single-use plastic which were not to be used or which were banned, which, as Dr. Dhawan was talking, are simple cutlery, plates, spoons, and balloon
Straws,
sticks,
yes.
etc. So all that has been banned now. The question that we need to ponder over is what has been the impact? To be very honest, the intent has been very strong, but we've not been able to push it largely because we have not taken the community along in this effort. Certain items, like the thin black bag that used to be used, has reduced but not disappeared. One shining example, particularly in the urban areas, has been the switch over from plastic straws to paper straws. That's a success story. But then that success story is geographically limited because the moment you move to tier 2, tier 3, and villages, it's not there. Plastic is still being used. And let us also remember that usage in those areas is also very high. So it's been a mixed bag as far as the use of single use plastic is concerned. You know, it's not that government has stopped at banning single use plastics. Then you have the waste disposal rules, the plastic rules of 2016, where certain things are mandated. And today, the most talked about thing is now the mandatory recycling of plastics. What this is going to do is push the industry into using more and more recycled plastic. So the end of life story gets far more convenient, circularity sets in. But on the other hand, you're also creating a new industry of recycling. You're adding to the economy. The government is also now enforcing them strictly. And I think these are very positive signs. But having said that, why do we always think that end of plastic is the business of government alone? It can't be. The entire community, the society has to come together. And more than anything else, it is the individual attitude which must change.
In fact,
Because if you,
you
sorry,
raised a
yeah,
very, very important point, and that is something that I wanted to discuss on this program, that through this broadcast, let's send out a message to each and everyone who's watching, that how can we bring about that behavioral change, because there is awareness. We can't say that we are lacking on the awareness front, and we understand how important is it for, to have a sustainable lifestyle. But Dr. Dhawan, what is it that is missing, that we need to put all our efforts in? Every one of us is using plastic in one way or the other, but behavioral change of the kind that we require has still not happened. So what is that push that is missing and that we need to put all our efforts in now?
see, one of the main problems with plastic, and especially the plastic which we throw in garbage or what is going to the oceans and rivers, is that indirectly it is entering our food chain and it's impacting us. Now, there are short films available, and those of us who are aware, we know what happens to cows, what happens to other animals who ends up eating, I should say, plastic along with the food. We also know the ill effects because the fish which we eat, and in fact, there was slogans written that in 2050, perhaps you'll be eating more plastic than the fish we eat. But then those are things which are really not brought as spotlight. We need to tell people how it is entering rivers, how it is entering, or how it is even impacting the drainage system, and what is the total impact on the economy. Because it also happens like many a times, like we think, if a small act of mine, will it make any difference? And I just want to share one thing with you. Like single use plastic is banned in Delhi for last almost 5 years, but you can still get it. You go to buy vegetables, you'll get it. Last week I was coming back from Germany, and in the flight before we landed, and I was quite surprised that there was an announcement made for all the passengers that single use plastic is banned in Delhi, and therefore, if you're carrying any single use plastic, please throw it and don't take it to the city. And I was quite amazed. I said, that's not the real story. The other thing is, like when you see, when you talk of single use plastic, but then isn't it the cling wrap which we are using all the time in all the eating shops? They give you a sandwich wrapped in cling wrap. That's also plastic. So there are two components. One is I should say no to it. I should say I'm not going to take in cling wrap. Please give me otherwise. And even the packaging, because if I'm hosting a lunch or dinner, I should say nothing should be in cling wrap. The other is because then definitely somewhere the question asked will be that hygiene is also an important issue. How do we take care of that? And therefore, I have to look into nanoparticles. I have to look into other things, bioplastic, nanoparticles, so that I'm able to provide an alternative which is affordable, which is as cheap as plastic, and at the same time, that is something which is biodegradable, because the biodegradable one will actually take care of other waste as well. And similarly, because we take our oceans or rivers as a place where whatever you will throw will be taken care by the god and the river, and it will be treated, but we don't know it is not treated. It's only getting into smaller and smaller particles which are actually creating more problems for you. Microplastics, they're also there in detergents. So the way we have changed our lives in last so many years is that we have ignored the long-term impact of microplastic. But now is the time that we should basically, first of all, bring awareness, and awareness alone is not enough. It is providing solutions, alternatives. And everyone, I should say, is very sensitive today. Our generation or our next generation is far more sensitive towards environment. They are far more worried about their own health and also their affordability. So if something is little expensive, they would like to pay for it, and so that their health remains better.
Okay. Taking on from two very important points that Dr. Dhawan made, Mr. Mishra. One about raising awareness and providing solutions, but what about accountability? Do you think it's high time that in addition to awareness, there should also be accountability? Because as she rightly pointed out, there is a ban on single-use plastic, but I mean, it's not being implemented so effectively, and it is still being used. The second part was about the innovations or the alternatives which have begun to show real results. So on that front, where do we stand? How have we, how are we indulging with the private sector to ensure that we are doing more to explore that alternative as well to plastic?
See, I mean, I fully agree with what Dr. Dhawan was saying. Just add two things to it. Awareness is just not enough. We need to get into practical situations where we find a solution. So according to me, there are two aspects which we need to work on. First is that if I am using plastics, and I find it convenient, if I'm asked to leave plastics, I must have a substitute. So, innovation in that field is very critical to provide affordable substitutes, not the expensive ones. Otherwise, the adaptability will be very low. Second, everyone in the household feels that he is only contributing a little bit to the entire problem. Nobody looks at the totality of things. So we need to educate people to tell them that this is what the damage that you are carrying. And honestly, on one of the points that you mentioned, I would not mind being a little tough on this and imposing some penalty on issues relating to plastic. Because if we have to get over this problem, we need to be very strong. Now, on the other issue that you mentioned, on how do we engage the private sector and
Yes.
how do we take this forward, as I said, it's not the government's responsibility alone. So there are two engagements with private sector. One is in terms of the EPR, that is the extended producer responsibility, for which the private sector will be held responsible for recycling of plastic and use of better plastic. The second, I think, is we need to encourage innovation. Dr. Dhawan talked about bioplastics. It's so heartening to know that I was just recently at an event that we have a PLA plant coming up in India by a sugar producing industry which is going to make PLA out of sugar. So these innovations need to be supported, they need to be pushed, and people need to be told that we may come down heavily if things do not improve. It's not always easy to just say that this is a problem, so you cooperate.
Absolutely. To reduce dependency on plastic, Dr. Dhawan, my question to you is, and I'm curious to know, how are we investing, or are we investing enough in R&D, in having alternatives to plastic? Because he rightly said, I need a substitute if I have to refuse plastic. And for that, we need to find alternatives. So are we investing enough in R&D in this area and in scalable green alternatives?
Well, if you ask me from R&D side, there are number of alternatives available. And we'll also realize that there is always economy of scale. So most of these innovations, they are at the lab stage, and or we call technology readiness level. They are at TRL 3 or 4. Where we need to go is TRL 8 or 9, where the government interventions will be extremely important, because government should not look into plastic alone. They should also look at the cost to the environment. And therefore, if these products to begin with are subsidized to some extent so that they become popular, so that their mass production starts occurring, and thereafter it is that you put a price to it. And I'm sure that in years to come, because with the increased level of production, and innovation is not something you stop somewhere, it always carries on in terms of the further refinements to the technology, and that's how you reduce the cost. So, what I would like to say that yes, we have alternatives available. The research part, to the extent we should have done, the are research results available which can be scaled up. What is required is the push from the government that we are actually going for large scale production, and thereafter acceptance, because there may be teething problems, because what we are talking of bioplastic, we have to ensure that the strength is almost similar to plastic. And thereafter, let's also look at the other benefit. I'm repeatedly saying, because since they come from the organic product, they actually help in improving the soil nutrient status, in recycling of nutrients in the soil, and so on. So those are the benefits, environment benefits, that that technology will bring.
Absolutely.
It is not the answer, because what is happening today, sometimes I feel we are doing disservice, because most of us, we want to segregate the biodegradable component from the other component, and we end up using those black bin bags. And the moment the rag picker takes them, they just mixes because they just want to sell those plastic bags. So we are adding more to the plastic.
Yes.
You go to all those, all our hills, they are so beautiful. But every turn will show you that there are bottles, there are plastics lying everywhere. And again, we all drink mineral water. But is there a place where I can deposit my mineral water, empty bottle? The answer is no. So therefore, I'll just throw it in the bin. So what I want is that segregation where the use is, I should have opportunity to deposit it there, and those clean bottles perhaps can be recycled and so on. So there are alternatives available. If we do serious study and look for different things, one shoe won't fit all, but different places will have different solutions, and
Okay,
we
okay.
can find it.
To wrap up the conversation, Mr. Mishra, so based on the scale of the crisis that we are facing today, based on the kind of discussion that we've had, wherein we've spoken about the role of individuals, the role of community, the role of government, the role of private sector. So, and we've seen that in recent years, when India sets itself ambitious targets, we make it a Jan Bhagidari movement, the result has often been favorable. If we are to beat plastic pollution and say we want to reduce plastic waste by 2030, by the end of the decade, what are the three most urgent steps that you can think of that all of us can follow and which can help us achieve that goal?
This leads me to the last question you asked about R&D. I would be upfront. We are not investing enough in research and development. And this, to a present question, this is the first requirement. Because we need to create convenience of people to leave using plastics. To create that convenience, you need innovation. To get that innovation, you need to back up financially and in terms of policy. So that investment needs to be done. Second, I think the key is community. So whichever way you want to engage with the community through education, through empowerment, through coercion, whatever you want to do, you need to work with the community. And I think there is a third aspect which where I think government must work very strongly is the local bodies. At the end of the day, it is the local municipal bodies which are responsible for collection and recycling. Unless it is collected, it cannot be recycled. PET, for example, the bottles, more than 90% of it is getting collected because it's convenient to collect. The rest of it gets into the soil and you do not collect. And that is what is causing the damage. So we need to have a clear approach on waste collection in municipal bodies. We need to fund them. We need to spend money. And I think for a cause as large as this, no expenditure will be wasteful. The public sector, which is the government, the private sector must together start investing in this.
Sure, and this is a
Beyond blaming
crisis.
people,
This is a crisis of sorts that it can't be battled on one front. And as both of you have rightly said, every stakeholder has to do its bit. But perhaps what we can do best is at individual levels, we can see where we can refuse plastic and what we can do to possibly adapt to that substitute that Dr. Dhawan pointed out earlier on, and what perhaps our 2 generations ago our families were following, but because we switched to the convenient mode of living and it became detrimental to environment. So we'll try and get back to those ways of living and make our living more sustainable and more environment friendly. With that message, we'll wrap up the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Mishra, Dr. Dhawan, for adding value to the program today. And this Environment Day, viewers, let's pledge that we'll do as much as possible to refuse plastic and switch to any substitute that's been pointed out by both our panelists. So thank you very much for your time as well. It's a wrap on this edition of Perspective.